The docking registry for berth 47 read, UES Resolute Earth 1 vessel, just that. No escort notation, no fleet tag, no secondary listing. Counselor Vreth read it 3 times. He had been on this station for 22 years. He had seen the Drath arrive with 40 warships, their formations so tight they blocked starlight from the outer ports. He had seen the Oraki send 32 vessels painted in red and gold, their admiral demanding a full ceremonial reception. Even the Veleni, a quiet and bookish species, had sent 18 ships and a marching band. Earth had filed paperwork for one. The summit was called the Accord of Settled Worlds, a gathering that happened once every 30 years, where every recognized species in the Galactic Council came to vote on trade routes, border agreements, and the slow, careful business of not going to war with each other. Attendance was mandatory for full members. Humanity had been a full member for 11 years. In those 11 years, they had mostly sat quietly and voted yes or no without much fanfare. Nobody paid them much attention. They were young. Their territory was small. Their military was, by all known assessments, modest. So when berth 47 lit up with a single incoming FTL signature, the traffic control officer assumed it was a scout vessel. The assumption lasted 4 minutes. The UES Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the standard approach distance and began its docking run. It was not small, roughly 400 meters stem to stern, but it was plain, dark-hulled, no visible weapon arrays, no escort formation flanking it, no second ship, no third. Traffic control sent the standard query, fleet confirmation, secondary vessel count, escort designation. The Resolute responded, no secondary vessels, no escort, no fleet pending. Traffic control sent the query again, assuming a transmission error. The Resolute responded the same way. By the time the ship reached berth 47 and locked into dock, word had already moved through the station the way bad news always does, fast and loud. Admiral Sorn of the Drath delegation heard it before the docking clamps even finished engaging. He laughed. It was a short, hard laugh, the kind that does not contain any real amusement. They sent 1 ship, he said to the officer beside him. 1. In the council chamber, delegates were already debating what it meant. The Oraki representative suggested humanity had suffered some internal crisis and couldn't field more vessels. A Pelhari diplomat quietly wondered if humans simply didn't understand the protocol. An older Marin counselor said nothing and watched the feed of the docking bay on her screen. Ambassador Yuan, standing near the main entry corridor, watched the Resolute's airlock cycle open. He was sweating. He had known this was coming, had been told, not consulted, and had spent the last 3 days preparing answers for questions he hoped nobody would ask directly. They were going to ask directly. The airlock finished its cycle. Captain Dara Ward stepped out. She was not wearing armor. She carried no weapon visible at her hip. She had 2 crew members flanking her, a tall man with calm eyes and an easy posture, and a shorter woman who was already looking at the station's ceiling supports with what appeared to be professional interest. Ward herself moved the way people move when they have decided, before leaving the house, that nothing today is going to be a problem. She shook Yuan's hand. She nodded to the dock officers. She looked around the bay the same way a person looks around a hotel lobby, nodding the layout, finding the exits, deciding it was fine. "Any messages from the council?" she asked Yuan. "Several," Yuan said carefully. "Good," Ward said. "Let's not answer them yet." She walked toward the main corridor. Behind her, the Resolute sat in its berth, dark, still. The dock lights reflected off its hull in long, flat panels. Several station crew members had slowed their work to look at it. It had no visible weapon ports, not covered ones, not retracted ones. No torpedo bays, no point defense clusters along the spine. Nothing that looked like it was meant to hurt something. That was the part that bothered Vreth. He had pulled the scan on it the moment it docked. Standard procedure: every vessel at the summit was passively scanned on arrival. The scan came back with basic hull composition, power readings consistent with a long-range drive system, life signs for a crew of approximately 60. Normal, all of it normal. Except for one thing. The passive scan had returned no weapons signature, not low signature, not shielded signature, just none. A 400-meter vessel with 60 crew members and no weapon signature was not a warship. It was not even a patrol craft. Vreth sat back in his chair and looked at the image of the Resolute on his screen for a long time. Every species that came to this summit brought weapons. It was not aggression, it was the language everyone spoke. Weapons meant, we are here, we matter, we cannot be dismissed. It was the grammar of interstellar politics. Humanity had come with no grammar at all. And Vreth, who had spent 22 years learning to read every species that walked through this station, found that he could not read this. He did not know what it meant. He was not sure that was a comfortable feeling. He saved the scan file, flagged it, and sent it to his personal archive with a single note attached. The note said, "Watch carefully. Rumor on a space station with 42 species and 300 years of political history does not travel slowly." By the second morning of the summit, there were at least 9 separate theories about why humanity had arrived with one ship. The Oraki believed Earth was in financial collapse and could not afford a fleet deployment. 2 Pelhari delegates were convinced it was a deliberate show of disrespect toward the Council that humans, being young and poorly socialized, simply did not know how offensive it looked. A Marin trade representative had told 3 separate people that her government's intelligence division had flagged unusual energy readings near the human home system 6 months prior, and that the one-ship arrival was actually a cover for something happening back on Earth that nobody was supposed to know about. Admiral Sorn believed it was weakness. He said so loudly at the morning session when the agenda turned to security commitments. The integrity of this summit depends on each delegation demonstrating the capacity to protect it, he said, his voice carrying the flat confidence of someone who had rehearsed the line. A single vessel, however symbolically meaningful to its crew, does not represent a credible security posture. I propose that humanity's voting weight be reduced to observer status for the duration of the accord, pending a full security review. Ambassador Yuan objected. He used careful words and a calm voice and said that Earth's contribution to summit security was a matter of sovereign discretion, and that the human delegation was fully prepared to meet its obligations under the Accord's charter. Sorn smiled the way a person smiles when they believe they have already won. The vote on his proposal was delayed by procedural challenge. Yuan was good at procedural challenges, but it did not go away. Ward attended the session. She sat at the human delegation table, which was modest and placed near the back, and she listened to Sorn's speech and Yuan's counter and the whole long procedural tangle that followed. She did not look angry. She did not look worried. She looked like someone listening to a weather report for a city she was not planning to visit. In Corridor 7 of the residential deck, a different kind of conversation was happening. Lieutenant Osai Boteng had been looking for the commissary. He had a map on his data pad, but the station's layout was designed by a species that thought in spirals, and the corridors did not behave the way the map suggested they should. He had been walking for 11 minutes and was fairly certain he had passed the same air vent twice. "You are going the wrong way," said a voice. He turned. A young alien was standing near a wall panel, small, pale-feathered, with large reflective eyes and the kind of stillness that suggested she had been watching him for longer than the last 3 seconds. "I am Liss," she said. "Velani Communications Section, you are the human officer." "I am a human officer," Osei said. "There are 60 of us." "You are the one who walked through the docking bay yesterday, looking at the ceiling." "That was Petra, our engineer." Liss considered this. The commissary is behind me, down the spiral, third left, but the food dispensers on this level are recalibrated for Veleni dietary needs. The selections may not suit you. At this point, Osai said, I will eat whatever they have. Liz tilted her head slightly. Humans say that. I have heard it before, and then they look at the options and say something rude about the texture. Osai laughed. It surprised her. She stepped back a half step, as if laughter was an unexpected development. I promise, he said, to only say rude things quietly. She showed him to the commissary. Back on the Resolute, Petra Halvorsen was running diagnostics. She did this every day, not because the ship needed it, but because she needed it. The Resolute was her project in a way that the word project did not fully capture. She had spent 9 years building its core systems, arguing with 12 different engineering committees, losing 3 funding reviews and winning 4, and soldering things with her own hands in a dry dock on a cold moon when the contractor walked off the job. She knew every reading the ship should show. She knew the ones it did show. And she knew, with quiet satisfaction, that nobody outside this hull understood the difference. At 1400 station time, a Drath intelligence officer named Reth ran a remote scan on the Resolute from a relay node embedded in the docking bay infrastructure. This was not legal under Summit protocols, but the Drath had installed the relay 3 years ago and nobody had found it yet. The scan ran for 40 seconds. It returned nothing. Not a shielded return, not interference, not a corrupted signal. The scan reported that berth 47 was empty, no vessel present, no mass, no hull, nothing. Reth ran it again. Same result. He stood in the small monitoring room for a moment, looking at the readout, and then he did what any sensible person does when their equipment returns a result that cannot be real. He assumed the equipment was broken and filed a maintenance request. Then he went to find Admiral Sorn. He did not know how to explain what he had seen. He only knew that the Drath fleet had the best scanning equipment in the known galaxy, and that it had just looked directly at a ship sitting 40 meters away and reported that nothing was there. He found that thought very difficult to put down. Nobody announced it as a provocation. That was the point. The Drath filed a standard navigation notice, Patrol Wing 7, 40 ships, scheduled exercise in Sector 4 Alpha. Sector 4 Alpha was listed in the station's outer zone registry as an unrestricted area. Technically, nothing about it violated the summit's rules. Technically. In practice, Sector 4 Alpha sat 200 kilometers off the station's port side. Berth 47, where the Resolute was docked, faced port. The wing moved into position over 3 hours, arriving in a slow and deliberate formation that every sensor array on the station tracked without comment. 40 warships, Drath military grade, which meant thick-hulled, heavily armed, and painted in the dark gray that the Drath used to indicate active deployment status. They were not there for an exercise. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it. Liz was at her communications post when the formation completed. She looked at the display once, said nothing, and began logging traffic frequencies with the careful attention of someone who wanted to appear busy. In the summit chamber, the session on trade route agreements had paused. Nobody was looking at the agenda. Every delegation's side staff was watching feeds of Sector 4 Alpha on their personal screens under the table. Ewan sent a quiet message to Ward. They're in position. Ward was in the Resolute's forward observation room, which was a small space near the bow with a wide viewport and 2 chairs that had seen better days. She had been there for 20 minutes, sitting in one of the chairs, looking at nothing in particular through the portside glass. When Osai brought her the message, she read it, set the pad on the armrest, and looked back through the viewport. "Tell Petra to keep the diagnostics running," she said. "Same as always." "That's all. That's all." Osai went back to the bridge. Ward stayed in the observation room. Outside the viewport, the station's dock lights reflected across the hull in long pale strips. Beyond the hull, Sector 4 Alpha was dark except for the running lights of 40 Drath warships sitting in a formation so precise it looked like it had been drawn by hand. Ward watched them for a while. Then she picked up the communications handset mounted beside the viewport, entered a direct channel to the Drath Fleet Command frequency, which was listed in the standard Summit directory, because everyone was theoretically here in peace, and made a call. What she sent was short, a set of coordinates and a single line of text. Suggest you check these. On the Drath flagship, Admiral Sorn's duty officer received the transmission, noted the source, and brought it to the Admiral with visible uncertainty. Sorn looked at the coordinates. He did not recognize them. He ran them against star charts, nothing significant. He ran them against local station maps, nothing significant. He ran them against the formation's current position. The coordinates sat inside the Drath fleet's rear formation, not outside it, not approaching it, inside it, approximately 40 meters off the port bow of the Drath carrier Kethvar, which was the sixth ship in the rear line. Sorn stared at this for 3 seconds. Then he ordered an internal scan of the Kethvar's immediate vicinity. Every ship in the formation ran a scan simultaneously, because that was standard protocol when a coordinate alert went out. 40 ships, 40 scanning arrays, all pointing inward at the rear of their own formation. Every single one of them detected the Resolute. Not a ghost image, not a reflection artifact. A clear, solid 400-meter hull sitting inside the Drath formation at close range, running lights off, drive systems cold. Present in every scan in the way that a ship is present when it is actually there. For 6 seconds, 40 Drath warships had a full weapons lock on a human vessel sitting in the middle of their fleet. Then the scans refreshed. The Resolute was gone from all of them at the same moment, not jumping away, not accelerating, just gone, the way a reflection disappears when the angle changes. All 40 scans returned empty space. On berth 47, the Resolute had not moved. Its docking clamps were engaged. Its running lights were off. A dock crew member doing a routine inspection had been walking along the lower hull access corridor for the past 14 minutes without seeing anything unusual. Sorn stood very still. He had 40 warships and 3 decades of military experience and a political strategy that had seemed solid 40 minutes ago, and all of that now felt like it was sitting on a foundation he could no longer see clearly. He ordered the patrol wing to stand down from formation and return to standard spacing. He did not file an incident report. In her observation room, Ward set the handset back in its mount. She looked through the viewport at Sector 4 Alpha, where the Drath formation was already beginning to disperse, warships sliding apart from each other with the slow, deliberate movement of large things trying not to look like they are retreating. She stayed there another 10 minutes. Then she stood up, stretched her back, and went to find coffee. Counselor Vreth had watched the entire exchange on his monitors. He had seen the formation go up, seen it hold for 90 minutes, and seen it come down. He did not know what the Drath scans had shown. That information was on Drath encrypted channels, but he knew how a 40-ship formation looked when it decided, collectively, to be somewhere else. He sent a message to Ambassador Ewan. I would like to speak with Captain Ward at her convenience, privately. No agenda. Ewan sent it to Ward within the minute. Ward's reply came back in under 30 seconds. It said, tomorrow 900 aboard the Resolute. Vreth had never been inside a human vessel before. He had expected something military, hard angles, exposed conduit, the particular kind of ugliness that working warships share across species. What he found instead was a corridor that was clean, quietly lit, and lined along one wall with small framed photographs. Not tactical displays, not mission logs, photographs. Forests mostly, mountains. A few that showed cities from above taken at night, the lights spread out below like scattered grain. He stopped in front of one, a wide river, flat plains on both sides, a single long bridge. "That's the Danube," Ward said behind him. She had come to meet him at the airlock personally. "Hungary. One of our crew members put that one up. They grew up near there." Vreth studied it for another moment. "It is a very ordinary thing to hang in a corridor." "Yes," Ward said, "that was the point." She brought him to a small meeting room near the ship's center. 2 chairs, a table, and a viewport showing the station's outer hull from a low angle. No flags, no formal arrangement. 2 cups of something warm were already on the table. Vreth looked at his cup with cautious curiosity. "It is called tea," Ward said. "It will not hurt you, probably." "You are not confident." "I am very confident. Probably is just the way I talk." Vreth sat down. He wrapped his hands around the cup. They were large hands, 3-fingered, the scaled gray-green of his species. And he looked at Ward with the direct, unhurried attention that made humans instinctively uncomfortable, and that he had never bothered to soften. "I want to understand the ship," he said. "I know," Ward said. "I am not asking as the council. I am not recording this. I am asking because I have spent 22 years watching species arrive at this station with weapons, and I have become reasonably good at understanding what a weapon is for. And I cannot understand what your ship is for." Ward was quiet for a moment. She looked at the viewport, then back at Vreth. "Are you familiar with the concept of a lock that cannot be picked?" she said. "Yes." "The usual answer to that kind of lock is to build a bigger pick. Better tools, more force. You get to a certain level of technology and the lock and the pick just keep growing together. That is most of what this galaxy's military history is. Bigger fleets, bigger guns, bigger counters to the bigger guns." Vreth nodded slowly. This was not new to him. "Humanity looked at that cycle and decided to build a door," Ward said. Vreth tilted his head. "Explain that." "The Resolute cannot destroy your fleet. It has no weapons capable of fleet engagement. That is true. What it can do, what Petra spent 9 years making it able to do, is move through space the way light moves. Not faster than light, not through light like light. It does not occupy a fixed point in normal space. It occupies a probability, a range of where it might be. Any scan, any targeting system, any physical weapon, they all require a fixed point. Something that is and is not simultaneously cannot be targeted, cannot be hit, cannot be boarded, cannot be stopped." Vreth was very still. "Yesterday," he said carefully, "your ship appeared inside the Drath formation." "It appeared where I told it to appear," Ward said, "for 6 seconds. Then it appeared back here where you and I are sitting right now. Without moving. Without moving in any way. A scanner would recognize as movement, yes." Vreth set down his cup. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone re-examining an assumption. "You could go anywhere," he said. "Yes." "Any ship, any station, any secured location in the known galaxy." "Yes." "And you cannot be stopped from doing so." "Not with any technology currently deployed, no." The room was quiet. Somewhere in the ship's structure, a distant mechanical sound moved through the hull and faded. "Why," Vreth said, "did you bring this here to a peace summit? Why show it at all?" Ward looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile, and not quite something else. It was the expression of someone who had waited a long time for a question to be asked correctly. "Because the arms race was going to reach us eventually," she said. "In 40 years or 60 or 100, some fleet was going to decide that humanity's small territory was worth taking, and our modest warships would not be enough. We could have joined the race, built fleets, spent the next century getting bigger and louder and more threatening. But you did not. We built one ship, one answer, and we brought it here so that every species at this table would know, not guess, Not rumor, know that starting a war with humanity means starting a war with something that will be inside your ships before you know it is coming. Not to destroy them, just to be there. Inside your sensors, inside your locks, inside your assumptions about where the walls are. Vreth was quiet for a long time. Outside the viewport, the station's outer hull moved in slow reflection across the Resolute's dark surface. "You built a deterrent," Vreth said. "We built a reason to leave us alone," Ward said. "There is a difference between those two things," Vreth said. "Yes," Ward said, "there is." She picked up her tea. Vreth looked at the photographs in the corridor on his way out. He stopped again at the river, the bridge, the flat plains on both sides. He stood there for longer than he had intended. Fear, when it gets into the chest of someone like Sorn, does not make them go quiet. It makes them move. He called the first meeting that evening, 2 hours after the summit session closed. He used a private channel, a room in the Drath delegation's residential block, and a short guest list. The Gorvathi military attaché was on it. So was a senior Pelhari defense observer named Wen, who had a reputation for being quietly flexible on legal questions when the situation called for it. A Marin Rear Admiral named Tura, who happened to be on the station for reasons her government had described as personal. Sorn laid it out plainly, because plainly was the only way he knew how to operate. The Resolute was one ship. It was currently sitting in a dock with 60 human crew members aboard. The station's security presence around berth 47 was minimal. Summit protocol discouraged heavy security posturing near docked vessels as a matter of diplomatic courtesy. A coordinated boarding action, fast and clinical, could take the ship before the humans had time to respond. With the ship in their possession, combined engineering teams could spend the next 6 months pulling its systems apart. Whatever humanity had built, it could be understood. It could be copied. It could be countered. The Gorvathi attaché said nothing for a moment, then said he needed to consult his government. Rear Admiral Tura said the plan had risk, but the logic was sound, and that the risk of doing nothing was larger. Wen looked at the ceiling for a long time and then said he was not comfortable with the word boarding and preferred the term technical recovery. But he did not say no. Sorn took that as agreement. They set a time, 3 days from now, overnight cycle, when the station's traffic was lightest and the council session would be in recess. At no point did any of them ask what the ship might do if it knew. In the commissary, Liz had been eating alone and thinking about translation protocols when she saw the Gorvathi attaché enter the room, collect something from the dispenser, and return back the way he had come. She noticed this because he had come from the direction of the Drath residential block, which was in the opposite direction from where Gorvathi delegation rooms were. She noticed because she was, by profession and habit, a person who noticed things. She did not think much of it for another 30 minutes. Then she remembered the maintenance relay Reth had filed. She processed communications infrastructure, and the maintenance request had crossed her desk. And she thought about the empty scan result, and she thought about the 40 ships that had quietly moved away from Sector 4 Alpha, and she put 3 things next to each other in her mind and held them there. She found Osai in Corridor 7. He was reading something on his data pad and eating something that smelled strongly of processed grain. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked up. Her feathers were slightly raised. She had explained to him 2 days earlier in the commissary that Veleni feathers move without conscious control, and that when they raised like that it generally meant anxiety. He put the data pad away. She told him, all of it, the attaché's route, the missing scan, the pattern she could not stop seeing. She was careful to say she was not certain. She said it twice. She said she could be wrong. Osai listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Thank you," and walked quickly back toward the Resolute. Ward received the information 40 minutes later, in her quarters from Osai, who had already checked the timeline against publicly available station activity logs and cross-referenced the Gorvathi attaché's schedule, and found 2 additional anomalies that made Liss's account substantially more credible. Ward sat with it for a while. The standard response, the expected response, was to raise a security alert, call an emergency council session, lock down the Resolute, and request station security intervention. That was the correct procedure. Ewan would recommend it. It would be loud, public, and it would probably work. Ward did not do that. What she did was send Ewan a message with 4 sentences. The message told him to go to the council floor tomorrow morning, before the session opened, and invite every delegation head to look out the portside viewports at berth 47. The message also told him what to say before they looked. Ewan read it twice and sent back a reply that was mostly questions. Ward replied just the 4 sentences, "Trust me." She did not spend the night worried. She spent part of it in the observation room because she liked it there, and part of it reviewing Petra's latest diagnostic report, which was good. All readings nominal, all systems in the range they were supposed to be. At 600, Petra did one additional thing to the ship, not a modification, not a change to any system. She simply sent a quiet command to the docking interface and changed the status on one field. One line in the station's berth registry. The field was dock clamp engagement status. It had read engaged. She changed it to disengaged vessel holding position independently. The clamps themselves had not moved. The ship had not moved. The Resolute was sitting exactly where it had been since it arrived, not 1 centimeter from its berth. But now the station systems showed what had always been true. The clamps were not what was keeping it there. The ship was there because it chose to be. Petra logged the change in the maintenance record under a category that nobody would check until after the summit, routine hold verification. Then she went to make tea and let the morning do what it was going to do. Ewan was not a man who enjoyed being in rooms where things were about to change. He did them anyway because the job required it, but he had never liked the particular quality of silence that a room takes on when everyone is waiting for something they cannot quite name. The council chamber was full of that silence when he walked in. He had spoken to the delegation leads individually, each one in the 40 minutes before the session. He had told them, clearly and without theatrical buildup, that Admiral Sorn had coordinated a plan to board and seize the UES Resolute, that 2 other delegations had been invited to participate, and that humanity had chosen not to raise a security alarm or call for an emergency session. Instead, he said, Captain Ward had asked them to look out the portside viewports at berth 47 before the session opened. Most of them looked puzzled, 1 or 2 looked frightened, all of them looked. What they saw was a ship sitting exactly where it had been for 5 days, dark hull, running lights off, docked, apparently, the way it had always been docked. Except the berth registry, which several of them checked on their data pads after Ewan mentioned the clamp status, showed the same thing on every screen, dock clamps disengaged, vessel holding position independently. The Resolute had been free this entire time. It could have left the moment Sorn started making calls. It could have left an hour ago, or a day ago, or the night it arrived. It had sat in that berth for 5 days not because the station was holding it, but because it decided to stay. Nobody said anything for almost 2 full minutes. Then the Gorvathi attaché left the chamber to send a message to his government. He did not come back. The session opened 20 minutes late. Vreth called the room to order, which he did in the slow, deliberate way that meant he was controlling something. He presented the evidence about Sorn's proposal. Ewan had filed it formally that morning, and called for a response from the Drath delegation. Sorn was present. He sat at his table and looked at his hands and said nothing for a long time. Then he said the situation had been mischaracterized, and that he was only exploring security concerns informally. The room did not respond well to this. When, from the Pelhari delegation, issued a brief public statement through his government's official channel within the hour, saying that the Pelhari Republic had at no point given support to any plan involving unauthorized boarding of a summit vessel. The statement was technically accurate and conspicuously fast. Tura, the Marin Rear Admiral, had sent a private message to Vreth before the session even opened, saying much the same thing in fewer words. By midday, Soren had been formally censured by the Council and his delegation's voting rights suspended for the remainder of the summit pending review. He left the chamber without speaking. His delegation's warships filed an updated navigation notice, returning to Drath space, scheduled departure next morning. Nobody protested their early departure. The summit resumed. The trade route votes passed with broad consensus. The border agreement in the Outer Reach territories, which had been contentious for years, reached a framework that most delegations could accept. The human delegation voted on every measure. UN argued 2 amendments and won one of them. Ward attended the final session in the same quiet, polite manner she had attended all the others. At the close of the final session, Vreth did something that was not on the agenda. He asked for the floor and was given it, which happened automatically when the Council's eldest member requested it. He stood slowly, because he was old and because standing slowly was one of the privileges of being old, and looked around the chamber. He said, "Before we adjourn, I wish to ask the human delegation one question, publicly, and I ask for a public answer." Ward at the human table nodded. "Humanity built this ship," Vreth said. "This capability, this thing that the rest of us did not know existed. I want to ask in front of this full council why, if not to rule, if not to intimidate, if not to take something that is not yours, why?" The chamber was quiet. Ward stood up. She did not speak loudly, but the room was quiet enough that she did not need to. "We built it so we would never have to use it," she said. "So that nobody would ever stand in front of a human city and believe they could take it. Not because we want to frighten you, but because frightened people start wars, and we did not want to be the reason." She paused. "We brought it here for the same reason, not to threaten this room, to stand in it same as everyone else and be taken seriously. That is all." Vreth looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, sat down, and called the summit adjourned. The Resolute departed the next morning. No ceremony, no escort. It undocked in the quiet of the early station cycle, moved away from the port side on maneuvering thrusters, and then hit its drive. One ship, same as when it arrived. Liss watched it go from the observation deck on level 4. He had come up early to see it leave. Osai was beside her. He had said goodbye properly. Station contact frequencies exchanged. A standing invitation to reach out if the Veleni Communications Division ever needed a human consultant, which she had found unexpectedly touching. She watched the Resolute shrink against the stars. "How many more are there?" she asked. "Ships like that?" Osai looked at the viewport for a moment. He smiled. He said nothing. Liss watched the ship until the drive flare disappeared. She thought about that smile for a long time afterward.